Hello and welcome to another episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. I'm Mike Evans.
And I'm David Price.
And David, today we're going to be talking about the
Technics SL-1200G.
See, this is a really interesting riff for us because I think had we done this, well, maybe even just say a year ago, then I would have probably had a very different opinion than I have at the moment. And I know that you've talked very fondly about this particular turntable. I haven't quite shared your enthusiasm, have I?
No.
Well, until now,
Yeah.
to be fair, until now. And I'll tell you why, because certainly in my days of hi-fi retail, then Technics was a bit of a, well, it wasn't really, I guess being snobbish.
Yeah.
It wasn't hi-fi enough.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comment?
Yes.
So we sort of always thought, Technics, oh no, don't like that. It's not a Lin, it's not a Riga, it's not a Roxanne. So never really paid it too much attention out of pure prejudice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pure prejudice.
That's as well.
Through not listening to it at all, and I'm converted because you insisted that I borrow one.
Yeah.
Listen to it.
Yeah.
And I mean, what an amazing turntable it actually is.
Yeah, and I know. But I was the same actually. Just quite a few years before you. And I think actually many people watching this as well. We could almost blow up the internet by saying the SL-1200 is a great turntable, because there are even now a lot of SL-1200 and Technics haters, aren't there?
There are. Yes.
And the cliche is that it's a DJ deck. It's for sort of dodgy people called Darren who do home discos. Sorry, any Darrens who aren't dodgy. But you know what I mean.
I do.
So,
I do.
And the sort of hi-fi cognoscenti, the snobs basically, think that the SL-1200 is very déclassé, it's very downbeat and lowbrow, and it's a kind of tabloid newspaper of turntables, isn't it?
And they're wrong, aren't they?
Yeah.
They are wrong.
Yeah.
And what changed your mind?
Listening to one.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. But that's seriously though. So, because I'll tell you my Technics journey, because everything's a journey now, isn't it?
Yes.
So my journey started when I was I think it was editing Hi-Fi World. It was about 20 years ago, roughly, I was living in Bristol, and in my local Richer Sounds, they were on sale. The SL-1200 Mark II was on sale for £300, brand new.
Can I just stop you there, because this is where the snobbery begins, isn't it? Because if Richer Sounds sold it, then it wasn't hi-fi. It wasn't a proper hi-fi dealer. Because Richer Sounds didn't sell Lins and Roxannes and things, did they? So that's kind of the beginning of my prejudice, if you like.
Yes, absolutely. They were seen in all the wrong places, weren't they?
Kind of
SL-1200s,
and
dodgy retailers as far as the sort of highbrow hi-fi types were concerned.
Yes.
Our favourite hi-fi dealer from back in the day, Westwood Mason, would not be selling an SL-1200s.
No,
I think.
No, absolutely, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So Richer Sounds £300.
Yeah. Okay, so I was Technics curious. So actually someone told
journey.
On my journey, someone whose opinion I respect a lot told me that if you get an SL-1200 Mark II and take the arm off and put a decent arm on, like a Riga RB300 as it was then, they actually sounded very good. So I finally decided to do it, mainly because they were so cheap at Richer Sounds at that particular time. Maybe sort of towards the end when they were beginning to be phased out, which is they were phased out, the sort of original era of Technics was phased out around 2009, 2010. So I got me Technics, didn't put any stickers on my car or in my sort of in my window or whatever, and took the arm off and got a Technics arm plate from Origin Live, because Mark Baker at Origin Live had just started making them, and I put a Riga RB300 on it, and I was absolutely stunned by how good it sounded.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it sounded a lot better than with its a normal arm for a start.
And they're not £300 anymore.
No, they're not. No. But to cut a long story short, I then went to continue my journey.
Yes, sorry about that.
So I then got some Isono insulating feet from it, and I got a platter mat made actually by Sound Ed Steel, a company called Sound Ed Steel. I got my Riga tone arm modified by a company called Audio Origami. So hello, Johnny up in Glasgow.
Did they polish it for you?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So
it looked like the 3000 then of now.
It looked quite like the latest top
Cool.
Riga. But he basically did the rear counterweight modification, reset the bearings, rewired it, did all that stuff. Then it came down. It was fantastic. It sounded great.
Amazing.
And so I then thought, am I going insane? So I had it in my system with a Lyra Dorian, which was their entry-level Lyra at the time. It's now the Delos, but it's basically similar kind of cartridge.
One of our favourite cartridges at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. I used to play tricks on people. So I used to have people from the industry come around. Mentioning no names. I'd have... the way my house was laid out, or my listening room was laid out, was that I had my hi-fi behind the sofa. So basically you could sit at the sofa, speakers in front, and you couldn't see what was playing. So I used to play tricks on people. At one point I had as I was telling you, I had a later spec full LP12 Ecos 2 and Archiva, sitting next to an SME Model 10 with a SME 5 ARM, and I can't remember the cartridge, but a nice cartridge. I had my own Michel Gyra deck, which I'd modified beyond recognition and got it absolutely working great. And then I had this modified SL-1200, and I used to have people from the industry, the hi-fi industry, come round, visit me, to deliver stuff or to meet up or whatever. And a lot of them would go, "What's that?"
So, equal snobbery that I used to have.
Yeah, exactly. Have you gone native or something? Are you kind of are you going to edit DJ magazine next?
Yes.
So I used to play tricks on them by making them do a blind listening test, not knowing which decks, and telling me the favourite. And very often, out of those four, the Technics would win.
Yes. And I can believe it now, having lived with it for a while and heard it. It's an amazing sounding deck. It's the question for me is it as good as kind of a belt drive deck of the similar sort of price? So is it as good as the entry level Lin? Is it as good as the Riga P10?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
And I would say it's in many ways better.
Yeah.
It's different sounding.
Yeah.
In other ways, maybe not quite as good.
Yeah.
But it's an incredibly impressive performer.
Yeah.
But it's got quite a sublime bass.
Yeah.
Hasn't it? I think that's its kind of that's its killer USP, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's this amazing bass line which it can churn out.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Look, I mean, I think this is a tenuous term, but maybe not as musical as say the Lin or the Riga. But really, really great in terms of the way it can reproduce music.
It's kind of musical in a different way, I'd say.
I get that.
So I think one of the great things about it, and we're talking about the original and the new one that we're going to get onto in a minute here, is the speed stability.
Yes.
And you can play, I think, almost any belt drive turntable, and even very good ones. And the bass, you put on some kind of old Elvis Costello record or something with a nice chunky bass guitar playing along.
Yeah.
And it will be slightly blobby and bulbous. And then you put the Technics on, it's like, doom, doom. It's very, very tight. And it sounds very propulsive. So this bass is both strong and tight. The timing is great.
It's interesting you said it, because obviously one of the reasons why hi-fi aficionados didn't like direct drives was because they were hunting for the sound all the time.
Yeah.
And actually the speed stability now on the 1200 is phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always has been. Certainly from the Mark II onwards in 1978, I think that came out. But I think the problem with 95% of Japanese direct drives that we got were cheap,
yes.
and they had really really cheap motors, the cheapest possible motors. Yes, many of them were quartz lock referenced, but the whole thing was done in the kind of cheapest possible way.
Sure.
And very light platters and all the rest of it, and they just didn't do the basic design any favors, I think.
Sure.
And if you listen to a very high-end direct drive, then you don't get that, I think. It doesn't really happen at all. And indeed, if you look at the measured performance of these things, like for example, the new SL-1200G has got a wow and flutter of 0.025%, which is roughly half that of an LP12. From the certainly from the sort of the 90s. I don't know the very latest one, but
sure.
So they are very, very speed stable, extremely speed stable, and of course they're locked on at the right speed because they're referenced by a quartz crystal, so you don't get variations. For example, with temperature, it's always at the right pitch.
Sure.
So that's one great side of it, but they have to be done right, and.
Yes.
Most of the sort of Hitachi direct drives that were knocking around in the late 70s and early 80s were cost 60 quid, didn't they, or something?
And they were pretty terrible,
and they were
they?
Made of plastic.
Absolutely.
And awful. So,
yes, yeah.
So yeah.
But the latest one is done right. I mean, it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's just over £3,000 now, is it?
It is
like
3149 at the time of broadcast.
Yes, yeah, Great British Pounds. So it's quite dear, I suppose, by standards of say the LP12 these days, which that's entry level for that, isn't it? But I like the fact that it's pretty arm agnostic.
Yeah.
You can take any arm you want and pop it on.
Yeah.
From that Riga RB 3000, I beg your pardon, to the SME 5, which would probably be, for me, maybe the best arm to put on it.
Yeah.
See, I would really like to listen to it with the SME 5 and the Lyra.
Yeah.
I think that would be an absolutely killer combination.
Yes.
And I still can't quite believe I'm having this conversation.
I know people will, think that you've been kind of kidnapped and your brain's been transplanted or something.
Absolutely.
But I'm the same. So us in the 80s, we would have been sniffing and laughing and mocking at the SL-1200, wouldn't we?
Yes, absolutely.
Sort of go and hold your nose if you were near one, wouldn't you?
Yes, and ask people if they're suggesting that the world is round.
Yeah,
that sort of thing. So, interesting. So, in terms of its sound, I mean, it is incredibly detailed.
Yeah,
we've talked about this amazing bass. We've talked about it is still a musical turntable, although I would say not quite as musical as the Lin, or possibly the Riga as well. But it just sounds terrific.
Yeah,
absolutely terrific. And another thing which we've talked about before on here, and I know again it may sound a bit naff, but it doesn't really matter what sort of music you're playing. It works really well across all genres.
Yeah.
So I quite like a bit of prog rock, as you know. It's great with that.
Don't spring these surprises on me, Mike.
And then you've got a bit of you could even play techno and classical, and it just reproduces everything really, really nicely.
Yeah, it's very music agnostic, isn't it?
Totally.
Whereas I think the LP12 seems to be better with some types of music and less amazing with others.
Yes.
So I think the LP12 works less well, for example, with classical than it does with rock.
I agree.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, my system is quite a flat earth system. It's quite an LP12 based system, as you know. So I've got isobarics and all this stack of exposure amps. I didn't mind at all.
No.
We've tried it with a few different amps.
Yeah.
And speaker combinations. Certainly with your NS1000s, valve amps.
Yeah.
Terrific. Absolutely terrific. So, a very, very impressive bit of kit. So your group tests, they probably were a bit of an eye opener for some of the other industry people then.
Yeah. So my kind of impromptu group tests, but they were, I think what those told me and everyone else was that turntables have their own sound, and just like cars have their own character, or motorbikes or whatever, and it's kind of what you prefer. But that said, there's no denying the Technics then and now, and even more so now with the new SL-1200G, has an amazing speed stability, has a kind of very, as you say, very kind of agnostic about his music agnostic. So it'll just get into any record and play it kind of really in a kind of way that you'd expect a transcription turntable to do. The arm in the original, the 1200 Mark II and those kind of ones, was utter rubbish. Now, I'm going to make a lot of people on certain hi-fi forums very angry by what I've just said, and they're probably going to be, chucking their Denon DL103s at me by saying it, but the arm is poor on the original, and it's so-so. It's definitely better on this one, but it's kind of like running, the latest Ferrari with a set of kind of Chinese Lancel tires or something.
Sure.
Yeah, it will do the job, but it can be so much better if you put a great arm on it. And anything from a kind of Riga RB330, kind of cheap Riga onwards. So you can buy, and maybe Technics marketing people won't like me saying this, but you could buy the SL-1200G, for example, and get an arm board for it. I think Origin Live still do them, and put an SME5 on it, as you said. And I know someone who's done it.
Yes.
And he's got a Lyra. I'm not sure if it's a Delos or something higher, but he's got basically a mid-range Lyra moving coil SME5 on the latest SL-1200G, and it sounds absolutely staggering. So it sounds fantastic.
Yes. But if you wanted to do it on a budget, you wouldn't have to go as far as the SME5.
No,
would you?
not at all. The Riga, the base model Riga kind of thing would be way better than the standard arm.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even some really good moving magnets out there that would work with as well without any problem at all.
Yeah.
We've been listening to the Riga cartridges recently and impressed by all that range as well. So you could go Technics Riga.
Yeah, I mean the Riga Exact would be a great cartridge.
Yes.
And even just a kind of entry level Audio-Technica 8095 80 VM95E or something, which is 40 quid, something like that would do, because the deck is more important than the arm, which is more important than the cartridge, kind of thing.
And I mean, I don't think you can give it any higher praise than saying you could put an SME5 on it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be wasting your money.
Yeah.
And actually, that's sort of quite a you wouldn't do that with rubbish decks, would you? You'd improve the deck first before you put a decent tone on one.
Absolutely.
For exactly the reason you just said, because of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show actually what you can squeeze out of this deck.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. It's been, when I was experimenting with my £300 Richer Sounds SL-1200 Mark II, then I changed the platter mat, which made a big improvement. Changed the feet to, as I said, Isono isolation feet. That made a really good difference as well. And in the G, that's several of the upgrades they've done are basically, it's got better isolation feet, and it's got a better platter, actually, not a platter mat, but it's much heavier now at something 3.5 kilograms. And it's got a kind of metal top plate as well, which goes onto a die-cast aluminium top chassis, as it were. And then you've got the kind of basically kind of rubbery resin type base as well. So the thing ends up being very heavy. It's about nearly 20 kilograms, I think.
Yes.
It's definitely osteopath special if you pick it up from the wrong angle.
Yeah.
But it's very solid, very heavy, and Technics have addressed all of the things I think that were wrong with the original, which is already very good. Except they've done a new motor. The new motor is nearly twice as, I think it's over twice as torquey as the original motor.
Because it wasn't exactly untorquey before, for such a word.
Absolutely.
I think you were saying it gets up to speed in less than one revolution, doesn't it?
Something like that.
That's phenomenal, isn't it?
But more importantly, if you a great test of turntable torque, especially with a direct drive, is try and put a record cleaning brush on it while it's playing and hear it go, slow down. And you basically have to use two hands practically to slow the SL-1200 down.
Amazing.
And the higher end version, the flagship SP10R or SL-1000R, if you get the plinth and arm together, that thing is virtually unslowable down. You have to sort of start kind of sort of chaining it to something to slow it down.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's built like a tank, basically.
Yeah.
Is what we're saying. It's really built
superbly
like a tank.
built. The motor is even better than the original. Tetsuya Itani, who's the Chief Technical Officer of Technics, I spoke to at length, and he explained that, the original motor still suffered a tiny bit from cogging, which is this kind of slight speed imperfections, this kind of hunting, as it were, for the right speed, and kind of which kind of causes some kind of vibration. But I still think with the original that's virtually inaudible. It's so low, but the new one is even better, and they've even improved the arm on the new one as well. So.
And it's the best-selling turntable of all time.
Yeah, I think it's from 1972 until 2010 was the original, and you've got to think that it was being sold by all kinds of audio outlets,
all around the world.
So not the snobbish ones that you work for, Mike.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
So,
interesting. Well, it's funny you should say that, because just to sort of finish off, with the snobbish one I did work for, there's a guy there called Jonathan Danbury.
Yeah.
And Jonathan was swore by this turntable. He said it's a brilliant turntable, particularly if you put a decent arm and cartridge on. And Jonathan went off to be work for Technics.
Yeah.
And he had this amazing job title, like Chief Hi-Fi Listener or something like that.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, you were right all along. I hate to admit that if you're watching. And I took the mickey out of you for all those years and not knowing what I was talking about. So on that bombshell.
Exactly.
We need to do a riffometer.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's got to be a 10, I'm afraid.
I mean, I think if you're talking about if you took at the price point as well, not sort of ultimate hi-fi, but if you look at what can you buy for just over £3,000, it's got to be a 10, hasn't it? And I'm totally in agreement with you. And hey, there we are. You heard it here first. Technics make a great turntable,
and we don't care if we've upset the internet.
The world, absolutely.
So
And anyway, until the next episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you all again. Bye-bye.
Bye.